What if losing a war meant losing the sea forever? Bolivia didn't just lose territory, it lost a horizon, and generations have been paying that bill ever since. Stay with me, because this story isn't about heroes or flags. It's about ports turning into locks, treaties turning into cages, and an ocean you can still see, but can't reach. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Lore, from Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime, to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Every tale is verified in archives before it reaches your headphones. Hit subscribe, fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. Imagine being born in a country where salt lives in memory but not in sovereignty. Imagine growing up hearing the word coastal zone like it's a dead relative, someone from the family who never comes back, but whose name nobody dares to forget. Because in this story, the sea is not scenery, not a postcard, not tourism. The sea is destiny. And from Bolivia, it was torn away. I'm not here to sell you a war of spotless uniforms or heroes on pedestals. I'm here to tell you about an absence that still breathes in customs lines, in passports, in school maps, in truck routes, and in family silences. The War of the Pacific from 1879 to 1884 didn't end when the cannons went quiet. It fossilized itself into a lost coastline, into other people's ports, into treaties signed with pressure on the back of the neck. And that pressure is still felt. The stage is the Atacama, a desert that forgives no one, not even the victors. From far away, it looks empty, until you get close and realize emptiness was a mask. Underneath, there was wealth, forced labor, rails, nitrate offices, camps, and an economy that didn't ask permission. It moved like sand, swallowing names and borders. In the Atacama, salt isn't only in the ground, it's in the throat. It's in the way thirst outranks any general. Before the first shot, there was paper. There were lines drawn with a ruler across a map that never sweated in the desert. Some treaties promised calm, like promises spoken with a dry mouth. In 1874, Chile and Bolivia recognized the border at the 24th parallel, and Bolivia accepted something crucial. For 25 years, no new taxes on Chilean companies in that strip. It sounds technical, but inside that don't charge was a bomb sleeping, because a state has to eat too. In February 1878, Bolivia imposed a tax of 10 cents per quintal of exported nitrate. 10 cents. A small coin, almost ridiculous. But in the Atacama, 10 centavos could be the beginning of an earthquake. Along Bolivia's coast, thousands of Chileans already lived and worked, and foreign capital circled like an elegant vulture. The companies refused to pay. Bolivian President Hilarion Daza's government moved towards seizing and auctioning off its assets, and that chain, refusal, auction, and pretext spilled into February 14th, 1879, when Chile occupied Antofagasta. Not like an epic legend, but the way occupations arrive, with boots, with flags, with offices that change hands without asking the wind. That day, for Bolivia, the sea started to move away without moving at all. It wasn't that the ocean ran, it was that the key to the port changed hands. And when you lose the key, the water can be right there, and still not be yours. Bolivia answered the way countries answer when their breath is being ripped out. There was a rupture, a war declared, and a call to an ally. Because this wasn't only being fought in the desert, it was being fought in the balance of the whole coastline. And here comes a pact many call secret, even though in our region, secrets get whispered long before they're signed. In 1873, Peru and Bolivia signed a defense treaty. It was born of fear, yes, but also of the intuition that Bolivia's coastline was a door, and behind that door, more doors were waiting. In Lima, ink was left behind that still burns. A diplomatic letter warned, with almost prophetic clarity, if Bolivia allowed its coastline to be exploited in common, it would later be annexed. And then the danger wouldn't be only Bolivian, it would be Peruvian, Tarapaca, Arica, the southern spine itself. That letter wasn't an academic exercise, it was an alarm. Because in the Pacific, whoever controls ports controls the future. And in that era, the future was financed with exports, debts, and promises that smelled like London. Chile demanded Peru's neutrality. In practice, it asked Peru to cut its own ties to Bolivia. Peru tried to mediate because sometimes that is what you do when you know you're running out of air and need time. But neutrality was impossible without breaking your word. And in Latin America, a word can weigh more than a cannon until the cannon decides otherwise. On April 5th, 1879, Chile declared war on Peru and Bolivia. And from that day on, the sea stopped being sea. It became a weapon. If you want to understand this war, don't start with nitrate. Start with water. Whoever dominates the ocean decides who enters, who leaves, who eats, who buys, and who resists. This war was never going to be decided only on land. It was going to be decided in the hum of propellers, in smoke on the horizon, in ports that open or ports that close. When the sea becomes blocked, the country without a sea becomes hostage. On May 21st, 1879, off Iquique, the Pacific heard iron. That naval combat left symbols that are still spoken with emotion, especially in Chile. The name Arturo Prat driven into the story like a vow, and the name Miguel Grau drifting through it like a human shadow, caught between duty and mercy. But beneath the symbols there were bodies, fire, black water swallowing wood. While one ship went under, the narrative rose. The Peruvian Huáscar became a living ghost, roaming and striking supply lines. And Chile understood something simple. As long as that ship could breathe, the sea wasn't theirs. For months, the Huáscar was a needle stuck in the throat of logistics. It wasn't just a ship, it was time. Time for Peru, time to imagine the door could still hold. But time in war is always paid for. It was spent on October 8th, 1879, at Angamos, when the Huáscar was captured. That day changed the pulse of the war. Not for pride, not for poetry, but for consequence. From then on, Chile dominated the sea. And when one power dominates the sea, the desert becomes a corridor. What came next feels inevitable, but it wasn't. It was the result of control. With maritime supremacy, Chile could choose where to land, when, with what supplies, and at what rhythm. And so in November 1879, the Tarapacá campaign opened with a landing at Pisagua. Pisagua wasn't only sand and a pier. It was access to rails, warehouses, export routes, and to a wealth the world had already smelt. When a port falls, it's not only a city that falls, an entire economy goes down with it. War in the desert has an enemy that needs no flag: thirst. The Atacama doesn't kill all at once. It kills little by little, like a bill that arrives every day. In battles like Dolores and Tarapacá, the ground wasn't ground. It was dust in the mouth, eyes burning, boots that didn't know where to go because the horizon is a trap. There was fighting, there was courage, there was retreat. But the question never changed. Who has water? Who has ammunition? Who has sea? Tarapacá was a Peruvian tactical victory that couldn't become salvation. And there's the cruel lesson. In this war, winning a battle didn't mean winning a future. Because without control of the sea, Peru couldn't hold positions, couldn't feed its forces, couldn't prevent the enemy from choosing the next blow. The desert punishes the one who stays still and the one who moves. And when the sea is on the other side, the desert stops being a border and becomes a cage. Meanwhile, the war was also being fought in debt offices, in contracts, in letters that traveled faster than soldiers. Peru experienced a bankruptcy that had already exploded in 1876. Its guano wealth had been mortgaged, sold in advance, turned into collateral for enormous loans. To survive, the state had lived the way desperate people live, borrowing today what tomorrow would have to pay. And when tomorrow arrived, it arrived as war. That's the panic. They weren't only invading territory, they were invading the last economic cushion Peru had left. The nitrate of Tarapacá wasn't only a mineral, it was fiscal hope. That's why the Peruvian state tried to monopolize it, to control it, to turn it into support. And that's why private interests moved like fish in muddy water, looking for a place to breathe. The papers left traces, certificates, contracts, claims, and pressure. In times like these, the homeland becomes a file, and the file sometimes ends up in the hands of whoever has ships. That isn't romance, that's the mechanics of power. In 1880, southern Peru began to close like a door slammed hard. Tacna became a knot. On May 26th, at Alto de la Alianza, the dust of the high plateau mixed with smoke and exhaustion. Bolivia fought there with the urgency of someone watching their coastline slip away. And after the defeat, Bolivia was practically pushed out of the war on the battlefield, not because it stopped fighting, but because it no longer had the means to sustain itself. Clear consequence. Getting the sea back became almost impossible. Then came Arica. On June 7th, 1880, the taking of the Morro wasn't only a military episode, it was another lock snapping shut. Arica was a port, an exit, a link. And the name Francisco Bolognesi stays there, not as a triumphal statue, but as a mark of what breaks when a city becomes the last padlock. When Arica fell, Peru lost a vital point of breathing in the south. And for Bolivia, Arica had also been a promise. The idea that a road to the sea could exist even if it was through Allied hands. With Arica under Chilean control, that road narrowed until it became a ghost. What changed was simple. The sea moved farther away than ever. From then on, the map started lying more boldly, because paper can still draw hope, but daily life. Bolivia kept looking at the Pacific the way you look at a house you're no longer allowed to enter, and the world kept buying, investing, calculating, as if that locked door were a detail. But for a country, losing a coastline isn't a result, it's a logistical sentence. Trade, costs, dependence, silent humiliation. It's living with your neck stretched toward a port that doesn't belong to you. The war kept rolling north the way tides roll, except this tide was occupation. Chile advanced with the certainty that sea power gives, and in January 1881, the blow landed in Lima. Carrillos and Miraflores aren't just battle names, they're urban scars, smoke rising where homes used to be, families running with whatever they could carry, libraries and streets turned into war inventory. After those fights, Lima was occupied, and when a capital falls, the country doesn't simply surrender, it fractures. Occupation isn't only a soldier on a corner. Occupation is a tax, a requisition, a stamped paper saying, this is ours now. It's a market whose prices change. It's a school that changes its story. It's a newspaper that goes silent or becomes a tool. In Lima, war became daily life. And in that daily life, you feel the most challenging part. They don't only defeat you in the field, they reorder your life. They teach you how to survive under someone else's gaze. And that experience leaves a wound that doesn't always scream, but never disappears. This is where popular myth tries to simplify everything. Some people say it was about nitrate as if history were an invoice. Some turn it into a symmetrical clash, as if everyone lost and won the same. But reality has teeth. Bolivia lost its sea forever. Peru was occupied, bled out, and forced to negotiate with the capital in the shadows. Chile expanded and transformed economically. This isn't symmetry, it's an uneven consequence carved into territory. And while the region burned, outside they counted coins. In London and Paris, bondholders watched guano and nitrate as collateral. They didn't move troops, they moved pressure. The papers present arguments over who was paid first, which contract counted, and which debt was priority. And in the middle of that creditor war, Peru tried to renegotiate, to promise, to annul, to sign again. Dreyfus, guano, banks, committees, names that sound distant, but that touched the ground because they decided who could buy weapons and who couldn't. Chile, in occupied territories, also learned the language of money. It allowed, restricted, and reorganized exports, sometimes to fund the war, sometimes to choke enemy supply lines, and sometimes to gain diplomatic legitimacy. You don't need to invent a perfect conspiracy to understand it. War cracked open a safe, and the world reached inside. Extraction wasn't an economic topic. It was the underground current pushing decisions, accelerating occupations, and hardening the terms of peace. The United States tried to mediate. There was a conference at sea aboard the Lackawanna off Arica in October 1880. It sounds cinematic, diplomats floating while on land, roads were being closed. But mediation crashed into impossible demands, territorial cession, massive indemnities, and long occupations. It failed, and that failure left another consequence. Peru was fed an outside hope that later evaporated. When hope evaporates, what remains is resistance or a surrender that breaks in pieces. In Peru, the war didn't end with Lima occupied. It moved into the highlands the way an echo moves. Andrés Avelino Cáceres led resistance in the Breña, and there the war grew harsher, hungrier, and more marked by collective punishment. The mountains aren't a chessboard, they are a community. And when war enters a community, it arrives with forced levies, forced contributions, and suspicion. Peasants and indigenous people were trapped between flags and necessities. The land became a witness, not a judge, and a witness never forgets. Official history likes to talk about battles as if they're sealed scenes, but in the Breña, every fight opened a new wound in civilian life. Bread, mule, grain, coca leaf, blanket, everything could become a war resource. And when everything is scarce, nobody is innocent in the eyes of an armed state. War seeped into homes like dust, stuck to clothing, and left an uncomfortable truth. Resistance has a cost too, and the ones who pay it are the ones who always pay. On July 10th, 1883, at Huamachuco, Peruvian resistance took a decisive blow. There's no need to list maneuvers to understand it. Exhaustion turned into defeat. The mountains that had protected by height could no longer sustain with hunger. Huamachuco closed a door. What changed was clear. Peru was left without an organized force to negotiate from a less humiliating position. When a country negotiates while defeated and occupied, treaties come out tasting like pressure. On October 20th, 1883, the Treaty of Ancón was signed. Tarapacá was ceded to Chile definitively. Tacna and Arica remained under Chilean occupation for a period that promised a future plebiscite. Promised. Because some promises are born to never be kept. And while the paper said 10 years, daily life said indefinite. Consequence. Peru's map shrank, and the wound stayed open for decades, waiting for a decision that was delayed until people grew old waiting. Bolivia signed a truce in 1884, and even if its war cooled on paper before it cooled in memory, the result was already installed, landlocked. What began as a tax, occupation, and the sea turned into a weapon and ended as a permanent condition. In 1904, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Chile was written with formal ink. Bolivia accepted the loss of its coast. Chile offered free transit and a railway to Arica, as if they were telling you, you won't have a house, but you can pass through the hallway. Again, what if losing a war meant losing the sea forever? Not as a beautiful phrase, but as routine. It means paying more for everything you import. It means depending on other people's ports, strikes, and decisions. It means commerce becomes pilgrimage. It means the state grows used to negotiating what used to be a right. Your exports leave with someone else's stamp. Your sovereignty breathes by permission. For Bolivia, the sea became a closed window that still lets the cold in. In Bolivia, the sea didn't disappear from culture. It became an anthem, a classroom, a date, a flag. The Day of the Sea isn't folklore. It's a pedagogy of mourning. Children repeat port names the way you pray for someone lost. Antofagasta lives in Bolivian memory like a bright ghost. A real city, but inaccessible in the sovereign sense. The coast vanished from the political map, but not from the emotional map, and that difference is a crack running through generations. In Peru, the wound turned quieter, but no less deep. Occupation left scars in the idea of the nation, humiliation, saqueo, slow rebuilding, and internal fracture. And the South remained suspended. Tacna and Arica were more than provinces, they were symbols. Families split, loyalties watched, schools pressured, belongings disputed. In 1929, Tacna returned to Peru, and Arica stayed with Chile. The plebiscite that was promised became something else, a late settlement with a long shadow. The war kept breathing. Chile, for its part, came out territorially enlarged and economically transformed. The wealth of nitrate and guano, now under its control, pushed works, state building, trade, and modernization. But it wasn't a clean story of shared prosperity. In the nitrate pampas, working life was harsh, and much of the profit flowed out through foreign channels. Conquered land didn't only bring income, it also brought social conflicts, regional resentments, and a diplomatic inheritance that still appears in family conversations, sometimes as pride, sometimes as discomfort. When a country wins territory, it inherits more than soil. It inherits the other's memory. It inherits a resentment it didn't ask for, distrust that sticks to language, tension that makes every negotiation heavier. Chile didn't only gain ports, it gained a historical responsibility that celebrations can't resolve, because our region doesn't forget easily when a loss becomes permanent. And we say this with respect. People are not the states, but people carry what state signs. In the desert and on the high plateau, borders didn't just cut lines, they cut communities. Aymara, Quechua, and Atacameño peoples, who lived in a territory as a continuity, suddenly found themselves divided by customs posts and different uniforms. The administration changed, the taxes changed, and the official language of authority. War reorganized who could move and who had to stay. And when mobility is reorganized, identity is reorganized. The modern border, in many places, is a direct child of that conflict, even when it pretends to be eternal. You see why this isn't a nitrates tale? Nitrates are part of it, yes, but the heart is the sea as door and as sentence. The sea is a weapon when you control it, and as an absence when it's taken from you. Naval battles mattered because they turned off the faucet of resistance. Desert battles mattered because they delivered ports, rails, and warehouses. Occupation mattered because it broke civilian life. And treaties mattered because they turned defeat into a generational routine. There's a bitter irony our continent knows well. 10 centavos helped move a story of oceans. Not because that tax was the only cause, but because it was the spark inside an already tense structure. Transnational capital, labor migration, fragile treaties, indebted states, territorial ambitions, and a geography that rewards whoever controls water. The Atacama wasn't empty, it was loaded. And when land is loaded with wealth and promises, hands always appear. The papers left behind tear apart two easy stories. The first, it was only 10 centavos. No, 10 centavos were a knock on the glass that was already cracked. The second, it was a war controlled from Europe, puppets on strings. Also, no, you don't need perfect strings to see real influence. British capital and companies, bondholders pressing, French contracts, diplomacies calculating. The war was Latin American in blood and mourning, and global in money and destiny. That mix is what hurts. Look at how it feels today. A Bolivian truck crossing the high plateau toward Arica carries more than merchandise. It carries a century of logistical dependence. A stamp at the border is an echo of 1904. A port delay is a reminder. In Bolivia, the sea is watched from afar, the way you watch a scar on someone else's body that somehow lives on your own skin. And that gaze isn't tourist nostalgia, it's structure, it's economy, it's dignity, it's a political conversation that never ends. In southern Peru, the memory of the war also becomes a border crossing. Tacna isn't only a city, it's a late return, a symbol that time doesn't always heal. Arica, in Chile, is a port and a crossroads. Families whose surnames travel, markets where the everyday mixes with the historical, and a persistent sense that the map was written with pressure. The border there doesn't feel like a line. It feels like walkable history, a bridge where every step has a past. And in Chile, Iquique and Antofagasta aren't only northern cities. They're the heart of an economic cycle that made and unmade fortunes. Nitrate raised buildings and raised conflicts. In 1907, years after the war, the Pampa would see workers' blood at Santa Maria de Iquique. I'm not saying this to mash stories together for drama, but to show consequence. Extracted wealth didn't always become well-being. Sometimes it became repression. The prize of war brought its own ghosts. The sea, meanwhile, keeps speaking. It speaks in speeches, yes, but also in details. Tariffs, trade routes, investment decisions, migration. It speaks to the fact that a landlocked country becomes more expensive to move, feed, and protect. It speaks to how Bolivia has tried again and again to open an international conversation about an outlet to the sea. And even if rulings and forums don't return a coastline, the insistence shows something human. Nobody ever fully gets used to having the horizon sealed shut. Peru, for its part, carried out reconstruction with a mix of wounded pride and pragmatism. The war left the economy weakened, the state reconfigured, and a memory that sometimes debates between a shout and a silence. Because not all mourning speaks the same way. Bolivia sings it as a lost sea. Peru remembers it as occupation and fracture. Chile narrates it as expansion and consolidation. Three memories, one ocean. And between them, a desert that still holds casings and names. The most dangerous thing about this war is when it becomes a spectacle, as if victory is a movie and defeat is a personal mistake. No, this isn't about humiliating anyone or inflating flags. It's about understanding the forces that pass through us: geography, debt, extraction, and treaties. It's about seeing that states made calculations and people paid with their lives, homes. And it's about respecting that each country remembers from its own wound. What if losing a war meant losing the sea forever? I'm asking again, but now it tastes like stamp paper. Because the Treaty of Ancón still breathes in southern Peru, and the 1904 treaty still breathes in every Bolivian conversation about sovereignty. Treaties are like stones in your pocket. You can't see them, but they weigh on every step. And when a treaty fixes a port, it also fixes the cost of living. It decides who waits in line and who passes straight through. The coast Bolivia lost didn't vanish physically. Antofagasta is still there, real, vibrating, growing, breathing with the sea beside it. The disappearance was political. And that's why it hurts more. What was lost exists, but you can't reach it with your hand. It's an absence you can see. And visible absences are what torment a people the most. It's like looking at food through glass, like smelling bread from outside, like hearing waves without having the key. Chile lives with that mirror too, because when a country grows through war, its history becomes sensitive material for its neighbors. And even after decades, the question returns, what does it mean to win when the other is left without sea? What does progress mean when wealth is born from a border pushed with fire? I'm not saying this as an unadorned accusation. I'm saying it as an adult regional question, ours. Because the global south knows something the north sometimes forgets. Development can have scars. And in the end, what remains isn't a military summary. What remains is a school map with a coastline crossed out, a Peruvian mother telling stories of Lima under occupation, a Chilean grandfather talking about the North as what was gained, a Bolivian merchant calculating costs through someone else's port. What remains is the sea as a present absence. The ocean is a broken inheritance. The War of the Pacific was a shadow that didn't leave in 1884, but became a habit. So I'll leave you with the same question we started with and repeated, now loaded with desert, piers, treaties, debt, memory. What if losing a war meant losing the sea forever? Tell me in the comments how it was taught where you live, how it was spoken in your family, what words are used to name it, and which ones are avoided. We're not here to fight flags. We're here to listen to what the map refuses to say. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.